Hey everyone, today I wanted to go ahead and talk to you about my classic WoW TBC raid composition guide. There's a couple reasons I'm making this video. First off, there's just sort of a lot of inaccurate videos on this topic online. I've noticed a lot of the YouTube videos on this topic came out like 2020, 2021 prior to the release of TBC Classic, and didn't really have time, obviously, because the game had to come out to sort of account for how the TBC meta was going to shape up. There was some unexpected outperformers once the classic, meta gamers got their hands on it. Notably, warriors and mages ended up performing better. There were some other specs as well, of course, and I'll cover that. Um, and also, well, I mean, some of these videos are just blatantly wrong, but also a lot of these videos just sort of overgeneralize the like ideal quote unquote raid comp, and just say like here's your ideal 25 specs for like the entire expansion, when in reality technically like the quote unquote ideal raid comp changes between phases. Like every phase would have a new theoretically ideal optimal comp. But I think more important than all of that, the most important reason I want to make this video is that no one really explains why the comp looks like that. What specs are like actually essential? And like in reality, like in actual practice for 99% of people in TBC, you're not going to have the ideal theoretical 25 most optimal specs. I mean, some guilds that are pushing optimal bleeding edge, etc., yeah, they can have the optimal 25 specs. For most people, you're going to need to adapt with the players you have and the classes they have and the gear they have and blah blah blah. And so like what is like theoretically optimal isn't really the most relevant if you don't understand how to build an effective raid comp given the constraints of I can't have the 25 ideal people. Now that being said, TBC is probably the single most restrictive expansion in terms of the specs you need to bring, and I'll get into that. But I'll go over sort of what makes it essential, and then what's sort of like the boilerplate backbone of an effective TBC raid comp. Um, anyway, let's go ahead and hop into that. So uh, the reason, and let me sort of take a step back and tell you why this happened. In 2007, when Blizzard was about to release TBC and was building TBC, they had realized that in Vanilla Classic, a lot of these specs like Boomkin, Shadow Priest, Ellie Shaman, etc., whatever, right, were sort of just irrelevant for the most part. Like they didn't really bring any damage, they didn't bring any good utility. There was no real reason to bring them. And so their idea to fix this to make sure that people could play those specs was to basically give them a talent or some sort of ability that would dramatically improve like or give like some raid wide buff or debuff that impacted everybody. So even if that class wasn't performing well, or that spec I should say wasn't performing well, that you would bring it just for that buff. Well, what that ends up meaning is that you kind of need like this Christmas tree of one-off specs for all of the different buffs and debuffs they bring, because each of these debuffs equates to like another 3 to 5% damage spread across either all physical or all magical damage in the raid. Um, and I think most of these should be pretty obvious. The first six I have listed there, you should be able to look at them and just realize why they're important. Maybe improved Hunter's Mark, but it just comes along with exposed weakness, which is super good. But I do want to touch on improved Fairy Fire and improved exposed armor. I think a lot of people, especially in later phases, sort of feel like, oh, we can drop the Boomkin. Boomkin's damage kind of sucks. The crit doesn't matter as much. I mean, the crit matters a lot for the Warlocks, but does it make up for the Boomkin? Maybe not. One of the major reasons you bring a Boomkin is actually for the 3% hit. Like the 3% hit isn't like essential. Obviously, anybody by the time you're even thinking about dropping Boomkins later on in the phases is going to be able to have hit cap or at least be well beyond what they need. But the idea is if you are always having a Boomkin, everybody in your raid who's doing physical damage can basically gem around the idea that they need 3% less hit to hit cap or soft hit cap or whatever. And that allows them to gem for more damage. This talent effectively means the raid is going to have another like let's say like somewhere between 2 to 3% damage across physical DPS, with them gemming more appropriately because of it. That plus the crit you give to your walks tends to justify the Boomkin's raid spot. Plus, it's just nice to have somebody who's your designated Fairy Fire person, because you need Fair Fire in general. And then also improved exposed armor. I think there's a lot of people who are just sort of like, well, the warrior can sunder, and the sunder that's enough. It's only 500 less armor. The way the armor damage calculation works in TBC and in vanilla as well, basically your first every point of armor matters less as you increase more, but that means in reverse, as you're decreasing armor, the more armor you decrease after like the current value, the more impactful it gets. Going from 0 to 1,000 armor is a ton of damage reduction. Going from 7,000 to 8,000 armor is a very minor amount. So if you're able to get a boss who they all start at 77, well, most of them start at 7,700 armor, down to 3,000 armor or 3,500 armor, if you can get that down to another 500 armor, then that is actually a very significant damage increase. In the event of exposed armor, if you're just thinking about improved exposed armor as like the last, like that extra 600, whatever it is, armor debuff, as like the last 500 armor, if you were just going to go Sunder instead, that actually comes out to about a 3-4% damage increase for all physical DPS across your raid, which is about the same amount as a Blood Frenzy, which is already one of the most insane talents in the game. So improved exposed armor is actually really strong. People don't realize how impactful that ability is, but it does justify the rogue spot. I know a lot of people are like, ew, icky yellow class. It is super good. You definitely still need, well, you still want, but definitely still need a rogue because they have that multiplicative damage increase across the raid, just like every other spec here. Obviously, I don't have shamans on here. I'm going to get into shamans and then sort of how the raid comp looks. Obviously, you need shamans, but these are just for your raid buffs and debuffs. For the raid buffs, you need your 3 paladin blessings. That's going to change depending on what class, which blessings they're getting. And then for the warlock, you need 2 warlock curses, curse of wreck, curse of elements, to boost your raid damage. For the same as everything else up here, right? It's all about having these buffs and debuffs that increase raid damage multiplicatively across your raid, and when you stack them all together, it's actually a very significant 10, 15, whatever % increase in damage across your raid. It's actually very insane. So let's go ahead and talk about what is actually your backbone of a comp and how it looks. You can sort of move these around, and in practice, you're going to have different ways this will shape up for you, but I just want to show you sort of how it looks. You can see on the left there, I have sort of what your minimum role and spec requirements are. So you need 1 main tank. A lot of bosses in TBC can actually be solo tanked, so you often only need 1 main tank. Now, everybody who's looking at this who's played TBC is looking at Group 1 and saying, well, where's the Feral Druid? Technically, you don't need a Feral Druid to main tank. This is just the essential minimums. But in practice, your Group 1 is locked. There's going to be a Feral tank there. You need an off tank. Normally, that's also like a Feral Druid or a Prop Pally, depending on the situation. You would normally have a Feral Druid in Group 2. But you need 3 Paladins, and bringing a Prop Pally is actually pretty good. It's really convenient. It's almost necessary for some raids. The AoE threat is obviously insane on a Prop Pally. So they tend to be very good for that. Also, TBC is going to have... we're going to have in Anniversary Edition, we're going to have dual spec. So technically Proc could swap, and there could be swaps there, and blah, blah, blah. Prot Warrior versus Fury Warrior is actually more viable now as an off tank, because you could just swap Fury Warrior, which does more damage than Feral DPS. So anyway, all I'm getting at here is that there's sort of arguments for all these. So I don't want to sort of lay out in stone, your main tank has to be this, your off tank has to be this, especially considering Anniversary, which has dual spec on it. But going into the specs, you need your Arms Warrior for the debuff. You need your Rep Paladin because it is the single most insane buff in the game. You need a Combat Rogue for improved exposed armor. And most importantly, and this is something you're going to need to know throughout the expansion, if you have melee DPS, they must have an Enhancement Shaman in the group. This means... And now, in general, you're going to need at least 4 shamans for Bloodlust / Heroism. In practice, ideal is often like 5 or 6, but you're going to need at least 4. But any melee DPS must have an enhanced shaman. The difference in damage a melee will do with an enhanced shaman and without an enhanced shaman is insane. It is often 10, 15, 20, even 30% more damage per each of these specs. Without an enhanced shaman, there is almost no reason to bring those melee DPS specs. You must have an enhanced shaman in those groups. And I'll get into sort of like how you can build out these groups later for like later phases if you have a lot more warriors and such. But like group 2, if you're going to have another melee group, it goes group 2, you swap that rest stop for enhanced, you must have an enhanced shaman with every single warrior, paladin, and rogue that is doing melee damage. Anything that benefits from Wind Fury must have Wind Fury or it is not a viable spec in this game. You're going to need your Serve Hunter just for those exposed weakness and improved Hunter's Mark that I showed in the previous slide. For Shamans, obviously you need Heroism. I don't know if they're going to have sated. We don't know the changes yet. I'll be sure to adjust this guide if they do significant changes. But assuming they don't, at least 4. Everybody's going to want Shamans. Everyone's going to want more Shamans than they can ever get their hands on. But in reality, you're going to need at least 4. And one of those is going to be Enhanced, and one of those is going to be Ellie. In Sunwell, you can maybe make the argument for swapping that out for a Resto, but it's not really that big of a difference. You still need a Shaman in the group. It almost might as well be Elemental. It's not that big of you're not really getting that much more damage out of another spec in another group. It's just a little silly. A Balanced Druid, again, improved Fairy Fire, that 3% hit for physical DPS, very important. The 2 Warlocks, you need them for the curses. You also need one of those Warlocks to be Affliction for Malediction. That extra 3% spell damage is very relevant. It adds up across the raid, and it means that Affliction Lock is an essential spot, even though obviously Destruction does more damage individually. It's not that far off. Mage, I put a little asterisk here. Technically, you don't need a Mage. They bring Arcane Brilliance for the extra intellect. That's actually very nice for everything with a mana bar, but it's not actually necessary. And technically, especially tier 4, you could technically literally just have a mage outside, buff Arcane Intellect on everybody, and then kick them from the group. I don't know if they'll change that. Who knows? Or if that'll still be allowed. But either way, it's nice to have the mage, because especially in tier 4, mages actually really strong damage, and I'll go over that later. But obviously, if you don't know already, the damage spec on mage that does a lot of damage is Arcane, and they need a shit ton of support, so you can't run too many of them. Notably, every Arcane mage must have a Shadow Priest and must have a Resto Shaman in their group in order to even remotely have the mana they need to do the damage that you bring an Arcane mage for, and oftentimes they'll even need Druids to be innervating them as well. Shadow Priest, not just for the mana, you must bring 1 Shadow Priest for Misery. Insane buff. Again, these multiplicative debuffs and buffs, they are very important because they all stack multiplicatively and they end up meaning a lot more damage across your raid. And again, if you have a Shadow Priest, you're going to feed that mana to your Arcane Mage. Obviously, if you don't want it for your Arcane Mage, you can have it for healers. All right. What you're looking at here, this is some DPS rankings from Tier 4. Also, Tier 5, Arcane Mages get even better than they are in Tier 4 due to a set bonus. I think it's a set bonus, whatever it is. But I want to sort of show how this changes. So here's Tier. You can see Tier 4 here, sort of the early stuff. Resto Druids are actually sort of a shocking, good spec in Tier 4 for healers. A lot of people just tell you the best healing class in the game is Holy. Late game, that's definitively true. Early game, Resto Druids were just performing better in Tier 4. Now, after Tier 4, Holy Priest takes the top spot and then never give it back, and Resto Druids continue to fall off. But in Tier 4, Resto Druids are pretty good, so technically, if you want to have the optimal comp, for the 1, maybe 2 spots where you're bringing a healer, not for the buffs, but specifically for the healing output, Resto Druid's actually probably better than a Holy Priest, exclusively in Tier 4. In later tiers, that Holy Priest, locked in, they're by far the best healer in the game after that phase. Damage-wise, again, everyone knows Arcane Mage, and that was the big shock in TBC Classic. Everyone knew they were good. Nobody realized that they were going to be significantly top damage from Tier 4 and Tier 5, and it wasn't until Black Temple and Mount Hyjal that we actually started to see Warlocks eclipse the Mages. And then also, something really key I want to bring up here, look at Fury Warrior. Fury Warrior in tier 4, the worst phase for Fury Warrior, it's not that far behind BM Hunter. Now again, you need Enhanced Shaman. If you don't have Enhanced Shamans, you can't bring Fury Warriors. But they're actually viable in tier 4. You're not trolling by bringing a Fury Warrior, right? Many people would be like, oh, like Fury Warrior, it's like a rogue. Like, look at the difference between a rogue. Like, a rogue's doing like 13, Fury Warrior's doing like 1,500. I mean, these are obviously pumpers. I'm taking this like top 80, top 90 something percentile, but like Warriors are actually good in phase 4, and they get only better throughout the expansion. Once phase 5 hits, bringing Fury Warriors instead of Hunters is completely viable. In fact, they're even better starting in phase 5. All right, here's Sunwell. Here's sort of what you can expect in terms of DPS meters in Sunwell. The Demonology Warlock's a bit of a meme, so ignore that one. But Warlocks, obviously, everyone already knows going into TBC, Warlocks become the gods of damage. They become really, really, really strong in Tier 6. Tier 6 is when just Destro absolutely pops off and no one really starts to get close to them. Fury Warriors eclipse BM Hunters starting in Tier 5 at the highest levels. They're in T5, it's almost indistinguishable between Fury Warrior and BM Hunter. I think the median BM Hunter did better than the median Fury Warrior in Tier 5, but Tier 6 on, it's not a comparison. Fury Warriors are doing way better. And even Combat Rogues, look at that. Combat Rogues, right up there with BM Hunters. So once you get to Tier 6 and Sunwell, melee actually starts to do well, even without Glaives. I'm going to make a class picking guide later and sort of get into this information. You don't need Glaives to have a Fury Warrior or Combat Rogue. Now, obviously, the top of the meters is going to be inflated by this, but in Sunwell weapons, it's not really they sim almost identically to having 2 Glaives. Now, and not almost identically, you will do more damage with 2 Glaives, but it's not that far off. Not to the point that you're going to be like, well, this class is irrelevant without Glaives. No, the class is still very good even without Glaives. Hence why even Arms Warrior is up there. Yeah, now technically you don't have to be to anything with arms. Anyway, but what I'm trying to say is, like, here's sort of like early on, if you're looking to fill spots, like what's your top damage, look for mages. You can run 2-3 mages in phase 4, or tier 4, I mean. And then once you get to later phases, you're really going to want those Warlocks. Arcane Mage kind of just doesn't keep up at that point. Fights are longer. They go, there's a lot of problems. All right, so let's talk about some ideal raid comps. In Tier 4, what I have here is sort of like a sort of stock standard Tier 4 raid comp. Again, your Group 1, realistically in practice, is going to be completely locked the entire expansion. You're going to have Feral, Arms, Ret, Combat, Enhancement. That's your Group 1 in any effective raid comp. That is the 5 specs you need in Raid 1. It covers so many raid buffs and debuffs. They synergize really well. The Feral tank buffs the rest of the group. It's a great group. In Tier 4, BM Hunters do better than melee. They also don't require Enhanced Shaman, so you can use that as a resto. Now, Enhanced does give them some benefits and benefits their pet. And, like, obviously, they have the Agitone and blah, blah, blah. So, like, it's not like a BM Hunter will get more damage out of Enhanced, but the damage added by an Enhanced Shaman over a resto Shaman really doesn't justify, like, bringing that Enhanced Shaman over just another DPS. So I'd say in phase 4, don't worry about bringing that second Enhance, because you're not going to have melee in that group, unless you just don't have the Hunters, in which case bring Warriors, but I suspect you'll probably have the Hunters. Group 3, in both, like, this is like your caster pump group. I would suggest throughout the expansion, just have the Warlock pumpers. Just solidify your core of 3 Warlocks, and then have your LE balance to be support for them. The mages, now obviously, like, I would say continue to bring a mage throughout the entire expansion for Arcane Brilliance. Technically, if you didn't even get Arcane Brilliance, it's not the end of the world. But they're really good in phase 4 and phase 5. You could even make the argument to bring 3, but again, they need a lot of mana to justify the existence. So if you have a lot of mages, like, cut that Resto Shaman, or not Resto Shaman, Resto Druid out of Group 4, put another mage, move the Resto Druid in another group, and they'll probably go but, like, even in phase 5, going a little bit, Arcane Mage will still be on top. But once you get to Sunwell, they just get super eclipsed. You don't really want to bring more than 1 mage. And you'll want to have your Shadow Priest more there to boost the healing output of your healers. Notably on Shadow Mages, or Shadow Priests, I should say, they are terrible DPS, like objectively bottom barrel DPS. But if you're progging, bringing 2 Shadow Priests is not the end of the world. So if you're wiping, like the ideal raid comp might not actually be damage, and it might just be bringing another Shadow Priest just because the mana battery aspect of them can mean that like if you have 2 Shadow Priests and like they can basically just give all your healers not infinite mana but like a shit ton of mana back, it can really prevent deaths. So I'm gonna throw that out there as a caveat on the like sort of ideal quote unquote raid comp. Like if you're progging and like maybe your players aren't good enough to just sort of blast everything first try, like you can go for these sort of safer specs like Shadow Priests that can really keep their group alive through Vampiric Touch or Vampiric Embrace and give mana and blah blah blah. Group 5, this is sort of honestly just kind of a little bit of like a cut group. You can kind of move these specs around. Like if you need to put the Survival Hunter in Group 2, it's not the end of the world. Like if you want to put the Affliction in Group 3, not the end of the world. Doesn't get the same benefit a Destro Lock would have, but like you might like you need these specs somewhere, and you might as well just put them in like the cut group in Group 5, where you're just there to boost the rest of the raid. You'll still do good damage, but you just don't have the support that the pumpers do in like Group 2 and 3 and 4. Outside of that, again, you're bringing like 3 pallies. You need 3 pallies. You need at least 2 locks. And you're bringing a bunch of shamans. Shamans are just super, super, super good. Bringing 5, 6 shamans is often optimal. Even if Sadig was in the game, there's still an argument to bring 6 shamans, 5 shamans, at least 5 shamans. So the totems are just too good. The party-wide buffs are too good. They're super essential. Anyway, so yeah, that was sort of my raid composition guide. I hope you found that informative. Again, just to sort of recap, I want to go over this again. The essentials you need to understand is that there's these 15 locked-in specs across TBC Classic that are the backbone of your comp. You're going to have, well, technically the Group 2 Resto Shaman could be an enhanced, and that's going to change, but you need this class/spec distribution, these 15 class/specs, to run an optimal quote-unquote raid comp, and after that you can fill with whatever you have available to you in your guild, but just try to fill these spots if you're trying to build an effective comp. And again, don't run with less than 5 healers. 6, 7 healers is also good. If you need, put them in the Shadow Priest group, etc. You can shift this around as you need. Just make sure you bring these specs, and no matter what you do, you'll probably have an effective comp. And again, you're probably going to want a Feral Druid in Group 1. Anyway, that was the guide. I hope you all found it informative, and see you in the next video.